Hello everybody, it's Chris back with the Ash and Stone channel. Today we're going to have a look at Goblin Wolf Riders. I'm going to show you filling in the gaps at the front and the back of the wolf, extending the skirt of the rider to better blend the rider and wolf together, and adding some fur to the shoulders to make the pelt on top feel a bit thicker and wider than just the back of the goblin. But first, a quick tip to get a couple of extra poses out of your wolves. If you cut the front left leg off wolf number 3 and the front left leg of wolf number 1, you can swap those over and make a couple of different wolf poses. Here's wolf number 1 with number 3's leg, and here's wolf number 3 with wolf 1's leg. A quick and easy conversion to get a bit more variety. So onto the sculpting. You'll need some sculpting putty, a blade and spoon tool, some sort of needle tool, and a hobby knife. So we'll start by filling the gap in the wolf's head. You'll need a little bit of putty for this, and you want to tease it out between your fingers into a long sausage. Once we've got our sausage, we're just going to press that along the line in the wolf's head, and then we're going to grab the spoon end of our sculpting tool and we're just going to work it down and make sure we press it into that gap. You can use a fair bit of force for this, and we want to make sure that we're working the tool up and down and side to side, and we can actually use the sharp edge of the gap itself to cut off any excess putty. You'll see the tool dart off to the side every now and then. That's just me lubricating the tool up on my nose to make sure that it doesn't stick to the putty. Now you can see here the excess putty that's been cut off along the sharp edge of the gap. I just drag that away with the tool and put it aside for later use. And from there it's just a back and forth process of burnishing down the putty and then removing the excess as needed until you've got a nice smooth surface. Skipping ahead, I've followed the exact same process on the snout and nose. And for the details such as the snarl and the definition of the nose, we're going to use the needle tool and we're just going to press those lines in. Once we're happy, I'm just going to use a lubricated finger and just rub that quickly over the surface, and that'll smooth out any sharp edges and blend everything together nicely. It's possible to leave fingerprints doing this, but if you keep your finger lubricated and you keep it moving and the pressure light, you should just polish the surface and you should be able to avoid leaving any fingerprints. Continuing on the head, we need to fill the gap in the upper and lower lips. So again, we're going to put a little bit of putty on here, we're going to push it into the gaps, and then we're going to cut off the excess. What you want to do is you want to use the contours of the lips and the teeth and the gums and everything that's already existing there and try and blend that join out nicely. And here we are, the gaps in the head filled. Most of the gaps, there is of course a gap under the chin and along the front of the neck. We're not going to worry about filling that gap because you'll never see that unless you're looking at the model from underneath, and that doesn't happen often enough for me to worry about it. The gap along the back is filled in using the exact same techniques I've already discussed, so I won't bore you with making you watch that. So on to extending the skirt of the goblin. Not too many crazy techniques here, we're just going to fill the gap between the wolf and the bottom of the goblin with a bit of putty, making sure we press it right into that gap there. And what we have to do is focus on blending the bottom of the existing skirt with the putty that we're putting on top. We achieve this by making sure that we've pressed the putty right up against the bottom of the existing plastic. And just like we did when filling the gaps, we're going to burnish it down onto the sharp edge of the existing skirt and blend those two surfaces together. However, the big difference between filling the gaps and blending in the skirt is that we have to use lighter pressure when we're blending in the skirt. The reason for this is if we do too much pressure, we will deform the putty and we won't be able to get it to match up nicely. So the best way to do it is just slow and steady with nice light pressure. If you do deform the putty, it can be fixed. The best way to do that is to press it up from below and press it back up into the plastic, causing it to bulge a bit. We'll be using that same technique to make sure we've got a nice sharp flat edge on the bottom of the cloth. The cloth at the back of the goblin is nice and taut and stretched out, so we can have that nice and smooth, but up the front where it wraps around his legs, it's going to be tucked in and it's going to be wrinkled and folded. So we're going to use the needle tool and we're just going to press in some lines to simulate that folding of the cloth. We can use the existing cloth to give us a guide of where to place these extra wrinkles and what sort of depth and size they should be. I'm working using smaller sections of putty here at the moment. No particular reason. You could do it all in one large clump, but this is how I did it. The downside of doing it this way is that I then have to blend the bits of putty together. The way to do this is to push it together so it bulges up, and then you burnish it back down to a flat surface. So I'm sure the sharp-eyed internet dwellers among you have noticed something off about this whole situation. Heresy, I can hear you calling. You've glued the rider to the mount before painting. And you would be correct. Normally I would have assembled and painted the rider and mount separately, but with these Wolf Riders I've been trying it this way, and I must say I've been liking it. Even with the rider stuck onto the mount, I've not been having any trouble getting paint where I need it, and I've really liked being able to weld the rider and mount together into one solid unit rather than them being two separate entities, one sitting on top of the other. So it's something I'm going to experiment with on more traditional cavalry in the future. Anyway, there's one side done. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. There's not much more I can say about the technique really. You've just got to go back and forth between bulging it up and burnishing it back down, bulge it up, burnish it back down, and just try and get that join between the putty and the plastic as smooth as you can and keep those edges sharp. Eventually you'll end up with something like this. Now I want to rough this up a little bit and make it a little bit more tattered, and this is also a great way to try and hide some of your putty joins if you haven't quite burnished them out. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the hobby knife and we're just going to cut a little notch into the edge of the putty, and then using our sculpting tool we're going to flatten off any raised areas from the knife cut, and we're going to widen the base of those cuts into a nice triangle and try and make the edges as sharp as we can. Thus. And after repeating the same thing on the other side, I'm going to put this down to dry before I carry on with the fur. A few hours later and everything is dry, I can now go on to working on the shoulders without fear of touching anything I shouldn't. To make the fur on the shoulders, I'm going to follow the exact same technique I did in my previous video, which if I'm competent I'll put a link to in the top right. So if you need more details, which you probably do because the focus on this is terrible, you can check it out on that video there. But the gist of it is, we're going to cut triangles into our putty, we're going to flatten the surface, we're going to raise the tips, texture a little bit, and we've got some fur. I'm not sure how I got an 11-minute video out of that. Anyway, same thing on the other side and we're done. So I do hope this video has been helpful to you and gives you some ideas of how to bring your Wolf Riders up to the next level. So thank you very much for watching and we'll see you all next time.